here I am with Alan Gratz, and we are at the See a Book Festival, and it's been pretty phenomenal so far.
It's been terrific, yeah. I just wrapped up my last event, and it was great. I did a school visit on the first day. The second day, we had students bust in to come and hear us talk, and then today was open to the public, and I did a presentation and a big book signing, and it's been every day of that has been fabulous.
It's been awesome. We've had a great bunch of people here. We had 1,500 students.
Oh wow!
Here yesterday.
I didn't know the total numbers. That's great.
It was packed and really amazing, and to see all the people getting so excited about this festival.
I love it.
Excited about books.
Yeah.
It's really been great. So I wanted to talk with you a little bit about maybe festivals and your books as well.
Yeah, totally.
A lot of your books have to do with history and the idea of history. Some of them that I've read have really connected with retelling the stories of history.
Sure. I love telling stories that have a basis in historical fact because I like, first of all, the puzzle aspect of it, taking things that really happened, and then I always drop a fictional character in there when I can. Prisoner's different, we can talk about that in a second, but dropping fictional characters into real things that happened so that I can have a protagonist who has a real beginning and a middle and an end to his or her story, but have the real events of history playing out, and the puzzle of how to make all those things work together. It's one of my favorite things to do. In a book like Prisoner, where it's about a real person, then I enjoyed looking for how to make a story out of a person's life. You know, to take all of those events that most people's lives don't make a perfect story.
Right.
You know, they are, we don't have naturally clean beginnings and middles and ends. We don't have novels for lives.
Right.
So looking for the ways to make a story have that kind of that the beginning, middle, and end, that three-act structure in a real person's life is a unique challenge as well. But I've always loved history. I love doing research. I love looking for stories, untold stories in history. That's one of my favorite things. So I'm going to keep doing that. I've got another World War II thriller coming out next fall. I'm working on another book about refugees in different eras. World War II refugees and Cuban refugees in the 90s and Syrian refugees today, all wrapped into one story. So I love telling real stories, and I think kids really like reading stories about real life, particularly stories that are outside their experience. And history gives us that. It's naturally, I'm going to botch a quote, but it's somebody's famous quote that that history is a foreign country for everyone, because even if it's American history, things are similar but different, and it's different enough that it feels like traveling to an alien world sometimes.
Sure, and it awakens the curiosity.
Totally. Yeah, I think sometimes I'll get letters from kids about Prisoner or about Samurai Shortstop, and let's say, I never thought I would be interested in this time period until I read your book, and then they've gone and read more about that time period.
Yes.
That's that natural curiosity I think that kids have. They just need to be exposed to many different things and see what clicks with them.
Sure. My first book of yours that I read was Samurai Shortstop.
Oh, cool, thanks.
And it was awesome. And it made me so curious and so interested in the time period and in just baseball in general and the connection between baseball and Japan. It was phenomenal. And one of the things that I loved about the book was, again, what you're talking about, that puzzle. You took a historical connection, and you even had at least one historical character. With the
the pitcher on the team is real, and the headmaster at the school was also a real person. Minor characters, so I made the major characters, the protagonist, and all the major secondary characters really be fictional, so I could make them do what I needed them to do.
Right.
But the big baseball game at the end and the fight that happened to precipitate it, those were all real things, and so I loved taking that and saying, who would have been on that team? What, can I make up one of the kids on that team, and what's his story?
Sure.
And then can I tell that against the backdrop of what really happened?
Sure.
And that book really came about for me because I was interested in Japan and went to the library and read more books about Japan and found that story.
Yeah.
And so it's that same natural thing. I read someone else's book. It led me to other books, and I hope that kids will read mine and it will lead them to others.
Right.
Yeah.
Another thing about that book that I enjoyed, again, with that same idea, is that you took a character who is in his culture and in his historical context, and you displayed that and still made him sympathetic, because sometimes your main character there makes choices that we, in our own
today, in our place in that, right, we wouldn't. So there's a big decision the main character makes. At one point, other kids are beating up another character, and he has to decide if he's going to be a part of that violence or not. And he makes a decision to be a part of that violence. And I had a lot of people come back to me. I had teachers come back to me and say, we disapprove of that decision. I don't like that you're setting that example. And I had to come back and say, this is not me advocating that. And today, I hope that kids today would have kids today in America, in our culture right now, would have a very different reaction than my main character does then. But he's a product of his age. It's 1890s Tokyo, Japan. And he's suffering from peer pressure, but also cultural pressure and history. And I thought the right way to write this scene, the realistic way to write this scene, is that he takes part in this. Right. He's not judgmental. He's not the person who calls them out and says, we can't do this, this is wrong. Because at the time, I don't think he really would have said that. That's a modern sensibility that I would have been casting on an older character. So thank you. I had to make hard decisions like that, and I do that. I try to put myself in the time and the place, as well as the shoes of the person, and say, make sure that they're not a modern character making modern decisions in the past. Right.
It's a more authentic experience, and I think that it serves the reader well, because then the reader has a more authentic experience, and that curiosity is fed.
We see a lot of people want to go back to books from the past that were contemporary at the time, and they want to change things about them, taking things out of Twain's Huckleberry Finn. There was a small kerfuffle over some things in the original P.L. Travers' Mary Poppins, and people would come out and say we need to change these so that they reflect the current sentiment. And I think that all books being written now should definitely have, should reflect our morals and ethics of today. But I think that we need to leave the books of the past alone, and that will allow us to read them and say, this isn't the way we feel now, but it is how they felt then. And to understand that, and then to talk to kids about that and say, this is a great way to open that conversation about, this isn't the way the world always was, and we need to be honest about the way it wasn't, the way it was, and see how far we've come and how far we need to go to keep fixing things.
Absolutely. Well, tell me more about League of Seven.
Oh, cool. So
I just started it, and it's really exciting.
Thanks. League of Seven was the first book that I ever wrote where I did not have an idea for it inspired by something else. With Samurai Shortstop, I'd been reading a travel guide to Japan and saw a person in a kimono throwing out a first pitch. With Prisoner, it's based on the true story of a real guy named Jack Bruner. With League, I was sitting around with my wife one night and I said, for my next book, I want to write a book that is full of awesome. I want to write a book that is so awesome that when I was in middle school and I walked into the library and I saw this book on the shelf, it would call out to me. I could not, like middle school me could not leave without checking this book out, And so she said, that sounds great. What's it about? And I said, I have no idea. So I go into my office the next day and I clear off this big board that I have, and I took a stack of note cards that were blank and a pen, and I said, I'm going to start writing down all the awesome stuff I can think of. Like stuff that 10-year-old me would have loved. And so I wrote down stuff like ray guns and airships and machine men and giant monsters and secret societies and brains in jars, because I always thought that was funny. And I pinned up all this stuff on this board. And right in the middle, I wrote full of awesome. Right in the middle. And I just to remind myself that everything that went up there has to be awesome. Full of awesome, So when I was done, I didn't have a book. I didn't have a plot or characters or setting, but I had a bunch of cool stuff. So then I spent the next 2 weeks sort of staring at that board, thinking, what's the connection between secret societies and giant monsters and mad scientists and ray guns and, fezzes and heads in jars, all the things that I wanted to put in there. I had fezzes on the list before fezzes were cool on Doctor Who, by the way. So they are cool. He was right. But I knew that before Matt Smith told me. So I had all these things on the board. I found the connections, and then I started to develop the story. So what it became is the story of 7 superpowered kids who battled giant electric monsters using airships and ray guns and clockwork machine men in an alternate America of the 1870s. And the other thing was, so it's a steampunk book. So a world where there's no electricity or gas-powered engines. Everything runs on steam power or clockwork power. And I had a lot of fun writing that and creating that world, but a lot of steampunk books are set in Victorian England, because that's the sort of heyday of steam power, and I wanted to write a book that was American. I wanted to make it uniquely American, and so one of the things that I did was I decided that the Native Americans had not been pushed off their land, had not been killed off by white settlers from Europe, and instead that Europe goes dark. Something bad happens to Europe in the 1700s, before what would have been the American Revolution. And so the only Europeans who are here are the few settlers who got here before 1770. And when they get cut off from their homeland, and every ship they send never comes back, and they don't know what's happened, they have to turn to the Native Americans for help. And they become the Yankee tribe, one of the new tribes in the Iroquois League. And so that by 100 years later, when my story takes place, we're looking at the United Nations of America, not the United States of America. And it by the 1870s stretches to the Mississippi River, just like America did then. But it is mostly Native American. And the different tribes are what we would think of as the different states, with the small little Yankee tribe being in New England, and that's their territory. I had a lot of fun with that, and exploring the different Native American cultures of the entire country, but particularly the East Coast. In the later books, they go across country, and we see different Native American cultures. Because, of course, I wanted to make sure that I didn't lump all Native Americans together, that each tribe and culture is unique.
Get their own reflection.
Right, that's right. And so, and then I was able to pull in the myths of Native American cultures, and pull in the different creatures and monsters that they believe were in the woods or in the rivers or in the lakes. And I had a ton of fun pretending those were real, and saying those guys are really out there and we have to battle them now. So I had a blast writing the League of Seven series. So the second book is The Dragon Lantern, and it's already out. And the third book is The Monster War, and that comes out in the summer of 2016. So that series is almost complete in terms of on the shelf. And each trade paperback comes out with a new hardcover. So that one's almost there.
Yes, fantastic. Well, I'm very much looking forward to continuing it. I've just started it, and it started awesome.
Thanks.
So
I hope you enjoy it.
I'm glad to hear that it's just a
non-stop action adventure.
Stretch of awesome.
Yeah. So and that was the other thing too, is when I was a kid, I wanted to pick up a book and be drawn right into it. And I think today young readers are exactly the same. A lot of times I'll run into an adult who's reading an adult novel, and I just mean a book written for adults, not X-rated. And they'll be reading this book, and they'll say, "Well, it's kind of boring, but I'm going to give it another 100 pages." No kid has ever said that in the history of time, right? So I want to make sure I grab kids right from page one and drag them through the story. And I've been really working on that, whether it's fantasy or whether it's a historical thriller or a contemporary political thriller. Working on getting their attention right from page one, and then writing a story that they don't want to put down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And it's been great to talk to you, and great to have you.
The festival's been terrific. I hope I get to come back. I hope it happens again next year.
Let's do it again.
Come back again.
Let's do it again.
All right, thank you.